Welcome to episode 8 of Mina Narrates. I am your host, Mina. Thanks for joining me in my library. This episode features part 1 of There's a Killer in My Town by Charlie Blackmoore, aka Beautiful Nightmare. It's the second part of an 11-part series I am honored to be allowed to present to you. This series releases every Wednesday at 5:45 p.m. Central Time, 6:45 p.m. Eastern, via YouTube Premiere through October to December 2nd. Before we begin, please remember to like, comment, share, subscribe, and ring that bell if you haven't, so that you're notified you don't want to miss any of this series. Now, let me whisper in your ears. Callie, if you're reading this, then it's most likely because I'm either missing or dead. Now, I don't expect you to understand. Hell, I don't expect anyone to understand why this happened, for that matter, but, well, allow me to explain. The week leading up to these events were as normal as it could have been. However, everything drastically changed. Small rays of sunlight poked through the partially open curtains when I awoke. Birds chirped just outside the window. The incessant buzzing of the alarm clock beside the bed caused a frustrated sigh to escape my lips. I rolled over, slapped my hand atop the button, and dangled my legs over the side of the bed. I rubbed my eyes, attempting to clear my blurred vision before I leisurely stood up. I sloppily managed to take a shower, got dressed, and hurried down the stairs to grab a cup of coffee. The news was blaring loudly through the television speakers. Anna Jenkins, local news anchor, read reports about the recent murders, which went into descriptive, unsettling details about how each victim was found. The townsfolk were scared to even come out of their houses when the killings began. The local police department had even gotten reports about the neighboring towns worrying where the killer would strike next. I had no idea how the media was able to obtain that information, but it really pissed me off. My husband Marcus was standing in front of the stove making breakfast when I walked into the kitchen. A pleasant smile spread across his face when he noticed me sitting down at the kitchen island. He set a plate of eggs in front of me as well as a cup of coffee when I sat down. He quickly turned down the volume and leaned against the counter. "Fuck," I grumbled. "Today's gonna be a shit show." "And good morning to you too, sweetheart," Marcus chuckled. "How'd you sleep?" "Fine, I guess." "Did you have the nightmare again?" he inquired. "As usual." "I really think you should start seeing a therapist again, Dean." "I have more important things to worry about right now. You know, like, who the fuck is killing people in our town?" I scoffed. Marcus intently stared at me. A few silent moments passed before he returned to the stove. He hadn't bothered to sit beside me like he usually did. Guess my bad language offended him. I finished eating the delicious breakfast and polished off the remaining coffee, grabbed my things, and headed out the door without saying goodbye. My relationship was already being affected by these murders. Fantastic. My neighbors were not outside when I reached my car, which had been the normal thing for the last few weeks since the murders began. Yet the strangest thing was that the Donaldson house was completely boarded up. How had I not noticed it before now? I cautiously backed out of the driveway and sped down the street despite being the town's sheriff. Snow Creek was a small town. I was born and raised there, so of course I knew everything and everyone. Kinda hard not to. My interest in law enforcement didn't start until I had turned 22. I dropped out of college, enrolled into the police academy, and went through everything else needed to complete training and finally become a police officer. 3 years later, shortly after my 25th birthday, our old sheriff retired and elections for a new one began. The election for the position went on for a month. Each and every candidate was more qualified than the next. That's when the killings started. It was steady and close competition for so long until the killing started. Then the job was just given to me last week because the other candidates turned up dead. I wasn't and still am not sure how in the hell that happened, but it seemed like somebody really wanted me to win. All I knew was that I had to deal with the crap ton of files that were tossed on my desk. The pile keeps getting taller with each new case that presents itself, as well as every new investigation that I had to oversee. The killing started 2 weeks prior to me being appointed as the new sheriff. Each crime scene as horrifying as the last. Yet we haven't even found one suspect, not one shred of evidence that could lead us to anyone. I had been working the investigation for 3 days straight, staying up late hours just trying to figure out what was connecting the victims. But the one thing each person had in common, they were model citizens that I had encountered at least once or twice in my life. A few squad cars were parked when I pulled into the lot. Strange. My guys were usually here before me, which means that there was another dead body lying around town somewhere. What another great start to my day, I remember thinking to myself as I grabbed a duffel bag from the passenger seat of my car. I slammed the door shut behind me and trudged into the police station. My cell phone beeped as soon as I opened the door to my office. I glanced down at the screen to see a text message from my deputy, Tanya. She was notifying me about the latest murder. My bag fell to the floor as I quickly shoved my phone back in my coat pocket, grabbed my gun from the desk drawer, keys off the hook on the wall, and my badge from atop the stack of case files before heading to my own squad car. There were several different thoughts that ran through my mind while I drove through town, but nothing had prepared me for what was about to happen next. Every officer stared at me when I arrived on the scene. My hands trembled as I stepped out of the car and slowly walked through the parted crowd of people. I knelt beside the sheet-covered body laying on the cement. I peeled the sheet back to take a look at the newest victim. The victim was female, in her late 20s, with short brunette-colored hair and bloody dark holes where her eyes should have been. Her throat has been cut cleanly from the left side to the right, indicating that the killer is more than likely right-handed. Her stomach had been precisely, almost surgically cut open, and her organs were neatly laid out on the ground beside her. Yet one thing seemed strange about it. Each organ as identifiable as the next, but there was something missing. The place where her liver should have been. It had been sloppily taken out. How precise the cuts were didn't make sense with how sloppy the missing organ had been removed. It's like the killer didn't care about the condition of the liver, just that he or she had it now. The remnants of a fetus remained intact in the womb, causing my breathing to shorten. I threw my hand over my mouth as I jumped up. I hastily walked away from the crime scene as to not contaminate it and leaned against the back of the grocery store. My stomach violently churned, and the contents of my breakfast slid up my throat and landed on the ground in front of me. That gruesome display of overkill wasn't what I expected to be dealing with at this time of day, and I especially hadn't imagined that I would be standing over the dead body of my husband's sister, whom we'd seen the night before. Marissa had been so excited about the recent engagement. However, she had said nothing about being pregnant. I didn't, and still don't think that Marissa even had the chance to fend off her attacker. "Are you okay, sir?" Tanya hesitantly questioned. "Yeah, I'm fine," I said. "Really sorry about that. This stays in the department. No one else is to know about this." "We can't control the press, Mr. Randall." "That's an order!" I angrily shouted. Yes, sir. Only the department will know." Tanya nodded. I watched as she cowardly retreated to the crime scene. She leaned in close to all the officers on scene just as the news vans pulled into the parking lot. Marissa's body was recovered. The extra officers acted as a barrier to keep the press from getting any information. I actually had faith in my coworkers, the people who listened to my every command, whether they would agree with my decision or not. Whomever killed my sister-in-law did it in order to get my attention. This kill wasn't random like the others. This was personal. But why? Who had I pissed off so much to exact this type of revenge? I knew that I had to tell Marcus about the tragedy, but after that, the only thing left to do is catch the vindictive son of a bitch that did it. An unsettling feeling washed over me as I walked away from the scene. The townspeople that I'm supposed to protect are being murdered for no reason. I needed to figure out why. I pulled the cell phone out of my coat pocket once I had driven away from the scene. I dialed Marcus's number and lifted the phone to my ear. The line rang 3 times before it sent me to his voicemail. I slammed my phone against the steering wheel, quickly made an illegal U-turn, and headed for his office. I was hoping he would have answered my phone call even after disagreeing this morning, because I didn't want to break the news to him in a building full of lawyers. The parking lot across the street from the law office was full of employee cars. However, Marcus's wasn't there. What the fuck is going on? First we disagree, we don't tell each other goodbye before parting ways, and now he's skipped work? We've been married for 2.5 years, and not once has that ever happened. I tried to call him again, but the line didn't even ring. I didn't get to hear his cheerful voicemail, and that's something that I thoroughly enjoyed whenever we couldn't talk. Several thoughts ran through my mind, and that's when I received the call.
"We have a 1016 at 1423 Raven Drive,"
the dispatcher said. What? That's my address. I grabbed the receiver and pressed the button. 10-4, I said, threw the receiver down, turned on the sirens atop my cruiser, and took off for home. Thankfully, I hadn't been the first officer on the scene, because now I had a witness to verify that I wasn't home at the time. I jumped out of the car, unholstered my gun, and slowly climbed the stairs to my front door. Officer Jenkins hesitantly kicked the door open. I follow him inside with my weapon out. He clears the entryway while I headed for the kitchen. I glanced around the room to see that it was clear. No one was hiding in there. Dimitri Jenkins steps into the living room at the same time I do. We holster our weapons upon seeing Marcus sprawled out on the floor. Crimson liquid pooled around him. This scene was identical to the one I had left no more than 15 minutes ago. His throat had been cut from left to right, his stomach precisely opened, and each organ neatly laid beside him. Even his liver had been sloppily ripped out of place. The one difference from his sister's murder to his was that his genitals were missing. I could hear Dimitri calling for backup. I could hear him telling me not to contaminate the crime scene until a thorough investigation had been done. But I ignored him. My husband was dead. He was killed by the very person that I am hunting, and Dimitri had the fucking nerve to remind me of protocol? My hands trembled when I knelt beside Marcus. Fingers gently caressed his left cheek before I slid my hands underneath his still warm body and held him to me. My bottom lip quivered. Tears rolled down my cheeks, and I pressed my lips to his forehead. I am so sorry, Marcus. I should have been here to protect you, and I wasn't. I slipped Marcus's wedding ring from his finger and slid it onto my own. I laid him back down, shrugged Dimitri off when he touched my shoulder, and ran up the staircase to the spare bedroom. I grabbed the key to my gun locker out of the desk drawer and began to gather any and all weapons I had. I zipped up the duffel bag, grabbed whatever I could from the desk drawers, and hurried back down the staircase when the sirens blasted outside the house. Blue and red lights flashed, which caused the already sunlit neighborhood to be brighter. "They need to take our statement, sir," Dimitri said. "Take it later, Jenkins," I grumbled. "I understand you're not in the right mindset, I really do, but it's protocol." "I don't give a damn about protocol right now." "And I really do get that, but you can't just do whatever you want." "The hell I can't! It was my family that was killed today, and my friends that were killed before. If you want a statement, then take this down," I said menacingly. "I'm gonna catch that bastard." Please let them take a statement. Let him go, Dimitri, Tanya said. But just let him go, she repeated. He contaminated the scene, Tanya. Jesus Christ, do I have to spell it out for you? It's personal for him, so drop it, Tanya commanded. I could feel all of them watching me as I rushed out of the house. A few of them had called out when I cleared the stairs and jumped into my car. I had a well-thought-out plan. My first stop was going to be the station, to grab more case files. I planned on setting up surveillance somewhere in the middle of any potential victims. Once I had obtained said case files, and then I'd sit and wait for the sick bastard to show up. I did as I planned. I went to the station, I grabbed the pile of files and drove around until I found the least lit area in town to park my black sedan. Snow Creek wasn't a crime-riddled town. We had very few people that would actually commit a crime, so I couldn't imagine that someone I know would be capable of this. I ended up studying each file for many, many hours, thoroughly looking over each horrible picture of each terrible crime scene. None of this made any fucking sense to me other than that I was close to each victim, whether they were family or we had been friends at some point. Why was I the center of it? Why would anyone want to destroy my life, and for what? I hadn't realized that daylight was going away until my cell phone rang. I glanced at the screen to see Tanya was calling. I declined the call, set my phone in the cup holder, and stared down at my right hand. Marcus's ring rested on my finger, white gold shining in the setting sunlight. Losing my husband would be the reason why I would catch the killer. The one person that I had failed to protect was gone, so there was nothing left for me to lose. My phone beeped. I picked it up once more and actually took the time to read the text message Tanya had left. I guess she was working the cases more than I had actually done, because apparently she was called to a disturbance not far from where I was at the moment, and she needed backup. I grabbed several weapons, placed them in concealed yet accessible spots, and hauled ass toward the abandoned factory. Gunshots loudly echoed through the area, which caused me to cautiously turn around the corner of the factory. I held my gun and flashlight out in front of me as I opened the rusted, creaky metal door. However, I hadn't expected to see so many dead bodies. Children, teenagers, and adults that hadn't been reported missing were scattered across the dirty floor. Like the other victims, their insides were neatly laid out beside each person. Some of them I had personally known, such as ex-boyfriends, friends I had grown distant from, the little children my nieces and nephews went to school with. Metal scraped against metal somewhere further inside the place. I hesitated to walk among the dead, but my choice was to save you. You would have been taken away if I didn't. Rats squeaked as I scooted them out of the way, some dragging pieces of entrails bigger than themselves across the floor. Yet the deeper I went into the factory, the more dead people I discovered, and the more my stomach churned. I wanted to vomit so badly, to just stop pursuing that sick person and take my own life so this could be someone else's problem. Yet I couldn't do that. I couldn't do that because of you. Where the hell did all these bodies come from? They couldn't possibly be from Snow Creek. Never have I been more stupid in my entire life. I had the chance to turn around and run the other way, but no, my pride wouldn't let me. I can probably guess what you're thinking right now, and yes, I considered all the possibilities, but the last thing that person was going to get was me. Anyway, I cleared the first floor of the building before hearing Tanya's voice shouting. I ran through the back door to see her standing behind a dumpster, gun in hand and her eyes glued to the person she was chasing. I hastily ran to her side, held my gun against my chest, peering around the large metal dumpster. The suspect Tanya followed here was dressed in all black. The silver zipper on his or her jacket was the only identifiable thing about them. A hood was pulled up over the person's head, which covered their face, and a knife rested in their hand. "This is the sheriff," I called out. "Lower your weapons and put your hands on your head." "Do it," Tanya hollered. The person let out a deep and menacing laugh. "Lower your weapons now," I shouted. I looked around the dumpster once more to see the person was staring at us. Tanya always had a short temper, which is what caused her to step out from the safety of that metal tin, and she pointed her gun at them. I reached out to grab hold of her coat, but she moved too fast. Her eagerness to apprehend the suspect had gotten the best of her, which caused me to follow her. The person slowly stood and stepped over his latest victim. "Put the knife down and get your hands in the air now," Tanya commanded. "I would, but," the deep voice growled, "I'm afraid it's gonna be stuck." "In what?" she inquired. "You." The man raised his arm faster than we could raise ours. The knife he had been holding glided through the air with incredible speed and landed somewhere. A sudden gurgling noise sounded in my ear before Tanya fell down, her flashlight and gun dropping to the ground, which scared the hell out of me, and I started shooting. I didn't stop firing until my clip was empty. The man slumped to the ground with a hard thud, and I quickly dropped my knees beside Tanya. I grabbed her discarded flashlight and shone the light on her. The knife was protruding out of her throat. Blood pooled in her mouth as her lips parted. She tried to talk to me. I knew that she was going to ask if we had gotten the son of the bitch, so I nodded. I nodded my head while tightly holding on to her hand. She shouldn't have gotten mixed up in this shit. She should have just left it alone and trusted me to catch the guy. I pulled the knife from her throat as she laid still. At least she didn't have to die alone in this desolate place as the snow started to fall upon us. I shone the flashlight in the direction of the suspect. He was still lying on the ground, but I couldn't tell if he was breathing. I gripped the knife tightly in my hand, slowly rose to my feet, and walked over to the man. I pressed my index and middle finger against his neck to check for a pulse, and much to my surprise, the pulse was strong. I shoved the hood of his jacket back, only to be mortified by his face. His skin was white, scarred from what I assumed was a fire, or something of that sort. His eyes were dark brown and his lips were stained with crimson. He reached out towards me, causing me to shove his hand away. "Who are you?" I questioned. "Please help me," he croaked. "What were you doing with that body?" I found them lying there," he weakly says. They needed help." "Why did you kill my friend?" "She startled me. I didn't want to." "Didn't want to what?" I screamed. The man's arm fell atop the cement as his chest stopped rising. I knelt down beside him, my hand violently shaking his limp body, because I needed to know what he was going to say. Something strikes my head, causing instant pain to overwhelm me. My vision blurred just as everything faded to black. I woke some time later. Snow had already blanketed the ground, and I slowly sat upright on the cold cement. Tanya's body, the man we shot, and the body we originally found were gone. Only a bloody, snow-covered trail towards the factory remained. I rubbed the back of my head that was throbbing while I struggled to climb to my feet. Everything I had with me the previous night was now missing. Son of a bitch, the killer was here and I still couldn't catch him or her. I dusted the snow off my ass and ran as fast as I possibly could to my house, which is when I started to write this letter to you. Like I said, I am still uncertain of what really happened. However, I do know that the person responsible for all of this is still out there, somewhere, racking up his victim count. At this point, I'm a rogue officer, and you may not see me again for a long while. I shouldn't have gotten emotionally attached to each case. Tanya would still be alive had I not. Anyway, I have a serial killer to catch. I love you, little sister. You'll hear from me again soon. I promise. Dean. Okay, our killer hit the ground running. Thank you for listening to part 1 of There's a Killer in My Town by Beautiful Nightmare, aka Charlie Blackmoore. Beautiful Nightmare is a wonderful person and writer. She has a passion for her writing, which shows in each story she writes. She says she aspires to create worlds where people get comfortable to delve deeply into temporary escapes from their lives and troubles. She has a gift for the macabre and vivisection. While horror is definitely a genre she excels at, it also feeds her passion. Speaking of which, she has just published another book of short stories. I'll have the link to the Kindle version in the description. The paperback version is in the works from what I was told. For this reading, I'm using the paperback version of the book published the 20th of July, 2002. If you want to get your own, there's a link in the description. You can also follow her on Amazon or follow her on one of her Twitter accounts. Both are linked in the description. Now, we have gotten to the meat of the story. Or maybe it's an appetizer. What do you think of the situation in Snow Creek? What do you think of Dean, our hero sheriff? Let me know what you think in the comments. While you're down there, please give the video a like and share it out. If you aren't subscribed, consider subscribing and ringing the bell until it rings so you don't miss the next part. Again, I want to say thank you to everyone who has been so welcoming, supportive, and helpful. Until we meet again, have a wonderful day or night, and be safe.